Yeah.
Anyway, hello
Yeah.
everyone, and welcome to the Business Thinking Podcast.
Hello. Today, I wanted to talk about a topic dear to my heart, which is version control. It's a big topic. We won't bore you too much, but Joe and I have different experiences with it, of course,
Yes.
and I think it'd be good to chat around it.
Yeah, no. So my first thing I'm going to open up with, and this is going to sound like, the most vague in statement ever, is version control for me is almost a must. I absolutely love it, and I think that if it's not there in any capacity, it makes working with things so much more difficult.
Oh, yeah, I mean, exactly. So, I mean, when I started my computer science course at uni, however many years ago that was now, 8 years ago.
8 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I pulled that. 2019 was, so 2015 was when I started.
That's
10 years.
10 years.
I'm not very good with maths, apparently.
That's okay.
A lot of people, I had the benefit of coming in sort of knowing a bit about Git and things like that already, but a lot of people were coming in from sort of non-technical backgrounds. And, for the first 2 months, despite our lecturers asking us, please start using Git and having a whole, few lectures about how it worked, people would still have their documents in a OneDrive going, V1, V2, V2 final, V2 final, final, V2 final, V2.
That old one.
Yeah, and of course, you've got version control and things like Word, but we're talking about branching and
Yes.
having commits and things like that. Proper full version control. Get things like Subversion, which is another.
Yes, I've heard of Subversion. I think, and speaking of that OneDrive thing, I mean, I don't come from a computer science background. I did a physics degree, and a lot of my report writing, I did code in part of my degree, but I am guilty of the V1, V2, V3 final, V3 final, edit.
Yes.
So and when I started to go into this sort of area, this workspace, part of my career, it was not a shock, but it was a realization on what I'd missed out on.
Yeah, because it makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is obviously your random naming of files for your own version control. Fine. It at some point, if you've got a lot of different versions and variations, it's going to be a bit difficult to manage inside your brain about which one's which. But the key thing about version control is if you're collaborating with other people.
Yes.
Right. If you've got a team of even 2 or 3 people, having some kind of source of truth, a literal source of truth, as your source code in Git, and being able to say, hey, I'm at this version or this commit reference, and be able to point at the version of code that you want to talk about, that you want to review, that you want to have someone review on your behalf that's not you, is important.
Yeah, no, that's pull requests merging in all because I know as well there's many. I don't know super much, but I know there's like people have different even standards of how they manage their branches or and Git structures themselves. I think like the usual one that I follow is you have a main branch that we don't really touch very much, and then you go off to develop or dev or whatever you want to call it, and then from there you make feature branches. But develop basically becomes your air quotes main in a sense until you're fully ready to release something, and then it goes back down to main. It's almost like this is a big block of work for giving to a client. They've wanted something very specific. You go, all right, development's all done, all the tests are passing, it's gone into UAT, whether you have a separate branch for UAT or something like that, and then it goes finally back down into main when you're like, job done, everyone's very happy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so that I think we follow a slight variation, but that format is generally called Git flow.
Yeah.
And it's not perfect. There are some scalability issues with it. If you get to really big project sizes, and some people struggle. I mean, I say project sizes, big team sizes.
Yeah.
Because you can end up with lots of random feature branches everywhere. So it needs very careful maintenance. Pruning, yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, pruning the branches.
Exactly.
I love all the terminology.
It's like the nerdiest bit of topiary you've ever seen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good word for topiary. I love that word. It's a good word.
It's a good word.
Yeah, no. So I think also it essentially doesn't matter what structure you follow, as long as you. I mean, it's like naming standards. As long as you have a standard and everyone is aware of what your branching standards are and what your branch naming standards are and things like that. As long as everyone follows it, it doesn't ultimately matter what your structure is. But there are pluses and minuses to some of them in terms of like the bigger picture, whether they scale to team sizes and project sizes as well, that you do have to keep be aware of, keep an eye on.
I don't know how much you've touched on that before, but I totally agree with you on the naming standards. And this goes into whether we're talking about Git, you're talking about Data Vault, you're talking about any data warehousing terminology, whether you're naming your databases, you're naming your tables or views, however you're naming things. It doesn't matter how you name things as long as it's consistent. I mean, it's a bit of an oddball, but you could literally start all your views with the word Craig, and then it's, and then, well, not the word, name Craig, and then you got some snake case underneath that sort of just goes, it's consistent. I mean, it's an odd one, but if everyone follows that same standard, it really doesn't matter as long as it's consistent throughout.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that people forget about with things like this is onboarding.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you've got, say, a team of 5, and eventually you're gonna have other people added to the team at a later date once the project scales up, or if you get approval from from the sponsor of the project that they want to scale it up, you're gonna have much more people coming into many more people coming into the project, and you'll need some documented standard that everyone's following, that everyone can quickly pick up.
Yeah.
So yes, it ultimately doesn't really matter as long as everyone's following the standard. But if it's a standard that's hard to understand or hard to pick up, then there can sometimes be issues. So there are some considerations.
So I can't name all my views Craig.
No, unfortunately, no. Well, I mean, you can if everyone thinks that makes sense.
We're working for someone called Craig. Please name all my stuff after myself.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense though? I'm not. I don't.
Oh
I'm
no,
not
that
mad,
makes sense. But you did mention as well scalability, and with GitFlow, like we've said, because we've done it a lot. We work on a slight variation of GitFlow to the one that I mentioned, but we're usually working in small teams.
Yeah.
If you have a bigger team, is there like a good standard not GitFlow, because that is Git sort of structuring that works for a more scalable, that is more scalable and works better with a larger team? Do you end up splitting things over multiple repositories, for example, or whatever?
Yeah, so I mean, splitting things over multiple repositories, I think, is a thing you can do anyway, because it's a bit like object oriented. As long as everything lives in the right place, you can kind of split it as much as you like, as long as you've not got a class with a single function in it, for example. Yeah. If you have a Git repo with a single file in it, why? Right. Yeah. So I think split repos logically. Obviously, in the context of DBT, you can have different DBT projects for different things. You might have each team has a different DBT project.
Yeah.
You might have sometimes you have a shared DBT project where everyone draws from that because you've got some core tables, core models that you want to share. And then a lot of the time, to a point, you can scale based on folder structure, and that's fine. In terms of the original question you asked, which is, is there a Git structure that can scale? Again, it depends. A lot of people like to eliminate main or eliminate develop and just have the one kind of top branch, because some people forget to, or there can be an issue with pushing from develop to main.
Yes.
And people think, well, if develop is usually just a copy of main, then what's the point? Or vice versa. So some people choose to just eliminate develop entirely and have feature branches coming directly off of main.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends on how you're going to release those changes. Again, how big your team size is and whether that's manageable or not.
Yeah, we're treating main a bit like the release branch in that sense. Aren't we?
Yeah. No, I like it that way. But I mean, if anyone has any experience with really large projects and using GitFlow or using a different Git structure, then feel free to leave a comment. But there are tons of different standards and tons of different ways to do it. And I think it really depends on your team size, your eventual team size, the exact work you're doing. Some projects, some programming languages really struggle with being split up around multiple repositories. So yeah, it depends.
It depends.
Ultimately,
I love that answer.
Mm.
You did also mention though, when you were talking about DBT, I had a sort of a brainwave of how you say you're grouping things based on like what's per earn together. Does this sort of then goes into a bit of like almost the governance and territory of correct ownership?
Oh,
of
yes, it
stuff?
does. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's almost like rather than necessarily talking about sections of the project that are, this is for this team to work on. To a degree, it's for this team to work on, this team to work on, this team to work on. There may be, they may be all this engineering team working on it, but over here on Repo One, this is
Don't
owned
call
by
your repos Repo One, please. But yes,
on
for the purpose-
Repo Craig.
Repo Craig, excellent,
Yes.
much better, thank you.
Yeah. You can then go and say, this is all owned by finance, and there is an owner there for that data area. So they have some sort of real stewardship over that particular repo. And then you've got, I don't know, legal who are in not Repo 2. We have a name for Repo 2?
Fred.
Repo Fred, and that's that's sort of got the ownership of, they have ownership over that way, but maybe the underlying team is still in terms of engineering, the underlying team is still the same but just split up.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another way of doing it. You may find that splitting it that way, there are some things that don't make sense, or you struggle to connect up certain repos and communicate with other teams when you do it like that. But that's less of a comment or an indicator of the code being in the wrong place, and more of an indicator that the team structure or your organizational structure is not as efficient as it could be. Right? So again, it depends, but there might be certain things when you split it up like that you find out, well, this isn't quite working. I find it difficult to for these two repos to collaborate with each other, or to connect to each other in some way, because actually, really, those two teams should be combined. Maybe it's very inefficient for those two to be separate.
Hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah,
but yeah, no, I think the crux of what we said so far is version control is super important. It's amazing to have, and by extension of that, version control, integrating all that, it's when you are working on large projects, it's important to know who your stakeholders are, really.
Yep.
That's essentially what we've said here. It's it's such a big part of any project work, because you don't want to be working to someone this half idea that someone said once. You want it all to be quite prescribed in a way.
Yes. I think we could spend a long time talking about commit standards and what you should put in a commit and all that kind of stuff, which is probably a different topic.
Commit often.
Commit often. That will be the rule at the moment. Some people don't know what to commit when they commit often because they haven't done much, and I like to do a work in progress commit, which is just WAP.
Yeah, I'm I flip flop, but yeah, work in progress is just sort of like, I've finished for the day. It's not complete.
I'm saving my progress. It's like a quick save in a game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a checkpoint. You can go back to.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, as long as you're not doing that on the developer branch or the main branch, which should be protected anyway, by the way, it's fine because you're not affecting anyone else. The only downside is if someone goes in and looks at your work, they won't be 100% sure, but at least they'll be able to see that you did work an hour ago rather than you committed a week ago, and they actually don't see that you've done work for a week, even though you have.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
So it is like the benefit of work in progress very easily and very obviously is just earmarking that this doesn't necessarily work yet.
Exactly. Well, that's part of the reason you're in a feature branch in the first place if you're following things like Gitflow. I think you mentioned something just then, which is the word integration, which sparked a thought. There's a lot of tooling now, a lot of SaaS products, and cloud platforms that have Git integration in them.
Yes.
For better or for worse, and and good or bad implementations, or implementations that could be better.
Yes.
I think as developers, and for all the developers watching, there's nothing worse than a tool that has Git integration, but it's all very abstracted, and you can't actually go and see your commits, or you can't control when you push. It's just kind of there's some version control, but we're not going to show you or tell you
Yeah.
what it is.
I think the big issue is if you are very familiar with terminal and
Mhm.
being able to do Git inside a terminal, nothing quite matches up to being able to do Git in a terminal because it's all there. I suppose admittedly there is this huge array of commands and it's a bit daunting in its own
It's
way.
very difficult to stick that in a UI.
Yeah.
I've yet to see a UI that fully embraces all of Git.
Yeah.
I think it would be too complex. Sorry, continue.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
But no, you're completely correct. There's too much depth to Git, and that's not a problem with Git. It's a tool that's been around for about 20 years, and
Mhm.
it's very, very good at what it does. But there's so much depth that requires that it needs a terminal. It needs like helps. It needs to be able. You need to work in it in that way that you can't, cherry pick, for example, necessarily in all things I've seen. You can't go do hard resets all the time. You can't do soft resets in everywhere that I've seen.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the
stashing
key,
as well. Actually,
stashing,
Yeah.
very useful. I think the key thing if there are any vendors watching, I think the key thing to keep in mind with Git is that if you have an integration with it, always provide the means for the user to go into the terminal and kind of do their own Git commits or Git commands on it. So have a UI that has all of the main functionality in some button presses, but allow the option to fall back to terminal if you need to, because that then is the best of both worlds.
Exactly. It's almost like, yes, most of the time most people working on these projects aren't gonna need the advanced Git interactions, but it's just there in the background.
Yeah.
Able to use it if you've really messed up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or if you want to do something a little bit unusual, or again, like you say, if you want to do some cherry picking or whatever. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
We could spend a lot
We-
longer talking
We
about this.
definitely could. If you're just listening to audio only, you can just see us smiling at each other, just like there is so much we could say right now.
Yeah. We wouldn't want to bore you too much with it. If there's anything in particular you want us to deep dive into, though, feel free to mention it in the comments or reach out to us on LinkedIn.
Yeah, or anything else. Generally, we will probably be able to riff for much longer than this, but
Yeah.
so I
I appreciate in our industry it's not that much, but I think between us we have about 20 years of experience now, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say about 20 years.
Yeah,
experience.
20
years. I'd say maybe 15 to 20, probably.
15 to 20, which is, I mean, Neil, for example, has, and sorry, Neil, for showing your age, but he has like 40, 50 plus, right?
I think 50 plus, maybe close to 40.
Right.
Yeah.
But, and combined, we probably have a few hundred in our organization. But, I think we have enough to be able to talk about things and say things.
And we all have different opinions on, and that's great. Anyway, yes, that was another aside. We will cut ourselves off there. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and see you in the next one. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.